Hi everyone, my name is Peter Lai, and I'm going to tell you a bit about where I've come from, how a gradual, long decline in my mental health has affected my life. I began as a peculiar kid. In that, I was extremely independent, yet I was self-directed. I marched to the beat of my own drum. When I was very young, the adults considered me to be exceptionally bright and put me into classes with kids who were much older than me. This removed me from the few peers with whom I was friendly. I became even more distant from others when I was 4. I nearly drowned. Since then, science has called this a near-death experience. And it ended up affecting me in many significant ways. One of which was that I was left with a deep feeling of guilt. I felt responsible because I didn't try to save myself, although I was only 4. Secondly, I became preoccupied with the mysteries of life, death, time, and space. So instead of being perceived as having normal interests, I was regarded by others as very different. Even strange. By the time I was in high school, I would spend my Friday nights either babysitting or off in the secondhand bookstores, spending my babysitting earnings. In class, I'd make attempts to speak, but because I didn't know how to relate to people, I'd contradict the teachers. I often knew more than they did about certain subjects, and I'd constantly correct people and alienate the other students as well. None of the teachers seemed to have any hopes for me. I had thought that school was about learning facts, so it came as a shock to discover, gradually, much later, that school is also about learning how to interact and socialize. Eventually, I tried to become more socially involved. As a high school student, I took on various solo activities, such as playing the guitar. I became the Ontario high jump champion. On the same year, I got 35% in phys ed. And in spite of being late 37 times in a single term and flunking right out of the high school, I ended up returning because I was only 16, graduating and going on to university, where eventually I got high marks. I went all this time without doing drugs. But then on my 22nd birthday, I finally tried some. It gave me a new perspective on music and intellectual ideas. And so I started smoking on the weekends. When I finished my undergraduate degree, however, I began to drift. I worked various jobs, and I felt unsettled in my mind. I managed to go back for a teaching degree, which I didn't get, but I was still smoking weed, and I had stopped reading as much or as quickly as I used to. I tested myself. I told myself I could stop smoking whenever I needed to. Unfortunately, when they started accusing me of writing childish essays, I wasn't able to finish my degree. I was forced out. So to prove I wasn't worthless, I took up a temporary volunteer job designing and teaching a high school class for the Department of Education, and I was the highest rated teacher in the school. I even briefly accepted welfare at that time so that I could finish teaching my course. Without school or regular work, the only interest I had left that would give me any social connection was drugs. I cashed in cans for money. I'd pick up samples of weed and sell them. I'd seen my younger brothers do this, and I figured out the process. But I was basically homeless. I had no emotional support, and I self-medicated with weed. Later, I used hash, cocaine, and heroin. From then on, a good portion of my time would be spent on the streets. I got a job in an apartment a couple of times, but I ended up losing them. When I considered applying to grad school again in a different field, I found out that I had been pretty much ostracized from that group because of my connections with drugs. So I refocused on my social problems. This time I tried to learn team sports, like ball hockey, baseball, tennis, and Frisbee. I hoped through sports that I'd make friends and patch my life together, but then of course my social life was already circulating around the drug world. Things got worse and worse. My house burned down where I rented a room. I returned to living on the streets. The police got to know me. They called me the professor, and I was in and out of jail for years. A few years later, I was able to seek counseling and therapy, and I found a peer counselor who helped me deal with my root problems, reduce drug use, and gain entrance into the drug treatment court. Entering and graduating from the drug treatment court were major turning points for me. I finally felt that the system and the courts were on my side. It was because of the support associated with that housing and my involvement with CAMH that my mental health issues were finally assessed and identified. I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder and addiction disorder. And it was because of the drug treatment court that I found my way into supportive housing. I never would have asked for this sort of government assistance, but I finally decided it was time to have a better life, one without drugs. I took the opportunity. Since moving into supportive housing, I've remained housed and have not been rearrested or committed to any psychiatric institution. Being housed and having access to supports has provided me with the stability I need to be able to function and enjoy activities such as playing with a band again and being part of the dream team. In many ways, the dream team is a nice answer to my life problem of not having meaning. The dream team has enabled me to start working with others, to give back to people, and to enjoy personal relationships to a certain degree. I remain grateful for the supportive housing and all the supports that I have access to, and I continue to advocate for more supportive housing for people with mental health issues, so that in time, more people will benefit from this life-changing gift of stability and possibility. Thank you. I lost everything. I lost everything. I was offered to publish one of my graduate school essays. I was offered to have that published as a book by Boston Mills Press. They offered me a cash down payment. All I had to do was hand the manuscript to them, they'd work on it. I didn't. Why? Because it had been used to flunk me out of grad school. I was too foolish to realize that it had just been a pretense, that they were just trying to find any way of getting rid of me without formally expelling me. So what they did was they'd heap ridicule on me, and went around to all the different professors and stuff and asked them if they would please change my mark to a failure or give them a good reason to expel me. And they all liked me. So they were forced to do it themselves. And so they used ridicule. And then when I tried to get that teaching certificate, they went to my professors there. God knows what they told them, because I've never been treated so horribly in front of a group of near 100 people as I was by that renowned expert professor that I thought was a mentor. So I got let down by a lot of mentors. What was the question again?
Just some of the experiences.
Oh, yeah. So I lost everything when I was homeless. For some ridiculous reason, I had this stupid thought that other people were like me. And when my roommate had taken off to Bermuda for the weekend, that he had to move out of his apartment, I'm the one that went out and rented a truck, dumped it all on his mother's front porch. I didn't want to abandon his stuff. On the other hand, the members of my family just left my stuff in the house when they moved, or I don't know what they did with it. I lost everything, including that manuscript I could have sold, and I don't blame them heavily. I just didn't understand that other people, I kept on being told, other people are just like you. They're not. They're horrible. And I had not realized that. I just hadn't been close enough to people, hadn't been hurt enough times to realize just how bad people really were. So it took me a long time to lose my trust in people. And housing, it seemed to me that the best is to be unhoused. That was before I realized that nobody would mind my little box of, keepsakes. Because it was cheaper. And I used to sometimes just sleep on the beach and stuff. This is, in other words, I was by choice homeless for periods of time when my lease would run out someplace. So at one point I left all my stuff in a truck and I lived on the beach or slept at a girlfriend's place for a few weeks, and I thought it was a great adventure. I didn't have the picture I had later of homelessness. Later on, I was homeless when I was ill, old, withdrawing from drugs, and it was a pretty desperate, horrible situation. I couch surfed for a couple of years, sleeping rough, sleeping in an unheated warehouse, things like that. Housing is a human right. Some sort of basic type of housing should be available. The meanest criminals get jail. The problem, as I see it, is that people put too much credence in the business model, and so they're building condominiums when they should be building rental properties because they have a certain method by which they extract profit from real estate through investments. And although you can make money by housing everybody, it's a bit more work. And they shouldn't be allowed to use the word community unless the housing that's being produced is a range of housing at a range of costs that would accommodate all and future generations that want to live in that area. I don't think that the business model by itself is going to house our people.